any description of the reasons why one would be detained by the military. Today was the final hearing on the decision as to whether there'll be a permanent injunction. Up to now we had a preliminary injunction, now we get the final ruling soon from the judge. And basically why we're here is to discuss whether this can be constitutional, whether it could possibly be constitutional for the government to have the power to detain American civilians living in the U.S. who are not part of a military force and put them in military custody for years at a time without a trial. And that's really what the NDAA says. And the Supreme Court at the end of the Civil War twice said that the government has no power to put American civilians in military detention as long as the civil courts are operating. And if that was what the Supreme Court said when there's a civil war within the country, certainly the rule is even more compelling here, where there's no war in the country, and we're dealing only with terrorism that takes place abroad. And the judge was very skeptical, I think, about how this could possibly be legal. Can it be legal to put Americans in military custody at all when they're not part of a foreign military? Can it be legal to have a law that allows for this without defining what it is you need to do to be placed in military custody? Does it cover speech? And is it even necessary if the president himself said the law was unnecessary and he was critical about it, but he still signed it?
Right. So let me ask you a quick question. What if we look at let's say we have a Occupy Wall Street movement, and for some reason, it looks like the problems are going to come our way, economical-wise, environmentally, on many different aspects of our society. What is your take on it, from the fact that, what about if Occupy Wall Street was being classified by the government as a terrorist organization like it happened in England?
Well, actually it was. One of our plaintiffs, Alexa O'Brien, founded a group called U.S. Day of Rage. And that's actually a campaign finance reform group. And the Department of Homeland Security put U.S. Day of Rage on its terrorist alert. And that was introduced into evidence in this case. So the Department of Homeland Security actually has labeled an Occupy movement group along with terrorist groups as extremists. And that is precisely why we say these groups can be brought under this law, because they are in fact being treated by the government as equivalent to terrorist organizations, even though they just want to get corporate money out of politics.
Right, and then, let's say, Occupy Wall Street is not, where they talk about revolution, or it's not really a fact about revolution, it's more a fact of being an activist and taking a stand for what they believe, to a certain extent. Could be,
it's true that Occupy is really a consumer movement, an anti-corporate greed movement. It's not a terrorist movement. It has nothing to do with Islamic movements, nothing to do with the Middle East. Yet repeatedly, these Occupy groups have been tied by security experts working for various governments with Islamic extremist groups. We've seen it happen in London to Kai Wagala, who's the plaintiff here. We've seen it happen at U.S. Day of Rage. We've even seen journalists like Chris Hedges detained every time they come back to the U.S., having been in the Middle East or some foreign location. And we've seen a growing tendency to assume anyone who protests against the government must inevitably be associated with a terrorist group.
And now, on that point, in your closing statement, you did make a pretty powerful statement. A lot of the reporters were talking about it once you finished, regarding Japanese internment camps that did exist, decades ago. And tell me why you raised that issue, because a lot of Americans, if they're in their 20s, they might not even, they've glossed over in that text, but that actually did happen. And you made a reference, and I don't want to, paraphrase directly, but you did say something to the effect of, we are opening the door to the possibility for that happening again with this kind of nebulous, loosely aligned statement in 1021D.
Well, what we forget about Korematsu, and that, of course, is the Japanese internment cases. It's one of the cases. The government never offered any evidence of actual military activity by Japanese Americans. All it said was it's potentially possible that they will form a fifth column within the U.S. And no evidence was ever offered showing these Japanese Americans or Japanese immigrants were disloyal. And the court was persuaded under that reasoning to intern 120,000 people in what can only be called concentration camps. They weren't tortured and they weren't beaten, but they were often starved of food. They had no heat. They were exposed to the desert in Montana, winter and summer. About 20,000 died, and all of them lost all their property.
How long did that last?
That lasted from early 1942 through 1945. The only way out for someone from those camps was to join the military. And that's the irony, that they put them in these camps saying they were a military threat, and yet they would let the young men in these camps join the U.S. military. The truth is, it was really racist policy, fear of a foreign racial group. And that's really what we'll see come out of these types of laws. Let's not forget, just after 9/11, thousands and thousands of Arab Americans, or Arab immigrants, or Muslim immigrants, were arrested by the Bush administration and held in custody for days, weeks, and in some cases months, many cases years. And that was with no statute allowing this. Now, if we have the NDAA in force that allows any substantial support for these groups to be the basis or the pretext for detention, we have a Korematsu Japanese internment camp situation all over again.
Now, bring us back to the case, because there was a parallel, very in-depth analysis by the judge on AUMF and 1021B. So if you can, give us a bird's eye view for the people that weren't in the courtroom today on what she was kind of hammering at on both sides. To basically, the government stance was, as you mentioned, that they were trying to have it both ways. I think I remember you saying. So bring people into that kind of,
right.
Between the two laws as the government has posited.
It's a very arcane issue. The government says our plaintiffs have no right to be in court, no standing to be there, because what they fear is nothing new. They say we've had this power since 2001 under the authorization for the use of military force. And since 2001, we've had the power to arrest people who substantially support terrorist groups. So there's nothing new here, and since we've never arrested these kinds of plaintiffs, they have no reason to be afraid and no reason to come to court. Now, the problem with that argument is it's simply not true. The government has never had that power to arrest people who substantially support terror under the original authorization for the use of military force. And that's the declaration of war in 2001. If there's nothing about that, every single court that has been asked to apply the substantially supported standard has said no. No court has ever applied it. And the government has not been able to show a single instance in which it was ever used. So this argument that this existed all along under the AUMF is false, because it was not part of it. Really what happened here is because the courts kept rejecting this broad, substantially supported standard as a basis for detaining Americans, Congress passed it as a statute. Because the courts wouldn't agree to do it, Congress passed a law saying it could be done.
So that's essentially sidestepping the branch of the courts, and that's what the judge was bringing up. Now,
right.
fair to the point of the U.S. government did say that the litigants would not, based on what they have produced in journalism and activism, they did say that they would not be detained based on that information. That's correct?
Well, there's an awful lot of wiggle room in that. They said if what the plaintiffs have said is accurate, that's number one, and they only said it as to past things that they testified to. If our plaintiffs write again or interview new people, they're fair game for detention. So the government's never said we're not going to put people like this in detention. And secondly, they only said that after they lost the case. The government lost the preliminary injunction, and then they said, oh, we better fix this fast. We'll tell the judge we're not going to detain these people. However, they didn't even say that. In their brief, they simply said independent expression like the plaintiffs engage in is not part of law of war detention under the NDAA. Well, even then they didn't say they won't detain them. And when I brought that up in court, the judge said, well, let me ask them what they say about that. And I said, well, you can ask them, but it seems to me standing started at the beginning of the case, and you don't end it just because now they changed their mind. So finally they said, yes, Your Honor, we mean no, we won't detain them. Now, if that's an honest opinion, why not just say so when you first asked? Why do we have to go through 5 rounds of briefs, 2 hearings in court, and only after they lose and they're forced by the court to say no do they say so? I mean, it's like the president apologizing for slavery 150 years after it ended. It means nothing. When asked, what's your genuine viewpoint, they couldn't say so. And by the way, they even said today, that imprisonment can be perpetual.
They did mention that.
War correspondents can be imprisoned. If you're merely present near Al-Qaeda, you can be imprisoned. So if one of you goes to Afghanistan, spends a week with an Al-Qaeda group to film them, talk to them, understand their life, you are present, in their presence, as the judge asked, and the government said you can be detained. And you're doing nothing wrong.
Yeah.
And so the government admitted, even though it now claims we won't arrest our 5 plaintiffs, that we're going to arrest other people who do exactly the same thing.
And a question was raised as to whether, since the injunction was, since she blocked it initially, whether someone right now, if the government is following that rule of her law.
Oh yeah.
And what was the response to that? What was your? Well, tell everyone what her response was and what your take is on it.
Well, it was really quite incredible. The judge asked, are you arresting anyone under Section 1021? And she really meant to say, since I issued my order. And that's already 2.5 months. And the government said, well, we can't tell because we don't keep track of which laws we arrest people under. There's the AUMF, there's the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, there's the NDAA. And they said, well, we don't know because we don't keep track of which law we're using. So the judge said, well, how do I know you're not in contempt? If you don't know whether you've been arresting them and you're not allowed to under the order, maybe you folks are in contempt. Now, that's an incredible scenario.
Yeah.
That it seems, from what happened today, that the government is disobeying the injunction and detaining people, and we won't know because of secret detentions. And they say, well, you can go to court for habeas corpus if you're detained. Well, it took Mr. Hamdi 3.5 years to get his case addressed by the Supreme Court.
And the judge did raise that. She did mention that. She asked how long did it take, and then that response was given.
And many of the other cases were much longer. By the way, you mentioned 20-somethings. Do they know about Korematsu? There is a 20-year-old right here who's followed the case with my son. You might want to inquire. It'd be interesting to know what he would think about that.
I want to get to him, but one question before that. This is something as a journalist, and just I would put myself, someone in that park over there across the street, shooting hoop, playing basketball, grabbing a coffee after work.
Debating terrorism.
Well, with terrorism in mind, it's on everybody's mind because it's pushed through media, and rightfully so in certain spheres. But now, looking at today, this seems to be a battle because the mainstream media hasn't really focused on the NDAA. Is it an accurate statement, and I don't want to presuppose this, I'm just throwing it out there. Is it an accurate statement that this is a silent battle that just happened up there? That the NDAA, the plaintiffs, the 7 or so that are involved, that they are on the front of this surfboard on behalf of Americans, would you say, and their civil liberties, or am I reaching on that comment?
It's something we think about all the time. How much do other people think about these things? Do they get angry about them? Do they care? I can say that without exception, every single person I've told about this case has been shocked by the fact that such a statute could be passed. The media are not covering it regularly. There's been some coverage. The word is out there. I think one has to remember, what really counts in this day and age is the internet. What's in the New York Times is important, but not that overwhelmingly important anymore. There's a lot of discussion out there about this. I am a little saddened that we have a society that just doesn't react too strongly anymore to such revelations. But I would say millions of people do care, and there's a lot of discussion on the internet about this.
Could I just say one quick thing? I just want to me, it just seems very, very clear that the government really kind of has overstretched its boundaries so much that when the people, finally do push back, right, again and again and again, it's the people that get deemed like the terrorists when all the people are doing is just having like a normal reaction to the government that's actually the ones becoming like the terrorists, And so it's sort of like, the pot calling the kettle black, Like, You know what I'm so?
Have you been following NDAA since it came up in media? What was your first impression of it?
I mean, for me, the NDAA is just sort of part of it, and then that whole discussion with the codifying and the 1021B2 not being the same thing as the AUMF. You know, I mean, it's like they have so many fish. So many nets in the ocean. Right, like they don't know which fish got tangled up in which net. You know, is kind of like their attitude. Like, sorry, we can't keep track. We got so many. You know, we're trying to catch so many like criminals or whatever, but then they're actually the ones that are becoming the criminals.
We want to also include one of the other lawyers.
Maybe we should go fire up the crowd.
So tell us your name and your position with the plaintiff's team.
Thank you.
My name is Carl Mayer. I'm a fighter for justice and one of the plaintiffs' co-lead counsel in Hedges versus Obama.
What was your impression today of the hearings and what was your take? How did it go?
Well, I thought the judge, Judge Forrest, who issued the preliminary injunction against the government initially, is very dedicated judge, and I think she's very courageous, even though she's really just applying fundamental First Amendment law. But today's hearings, I thought the worst part of today's hearings, the Obama administration is clearly hell-bent on defending the statute, which is sometimes referred to as the Homeland Battlefield Act, sometimes the NDAA, but it's the worst assault on American civil liberties since the McCarthy era. It allows the government to indefinitely detain people without trial, without attorneys, and somehow the Obama administration has been trying to convince people that they're civil libertarians, and they're obviously not if they're willing to go to the mat to defend them. They not only were defending it to the max in court, but they were indicated by filing a notice yesterday that they're going to appeal it. So from that perspective, I was very disappointed in the administration's performance here today. In terms of the law, I think we have the arguments on our side. This law violates the Constitution of the United States. It violates our civil liberties. It violates any notion of equal protection due process. So this is something that has to be reversed, and I'm really honored to be part of the legal team that got a preliminary injunction, and we're trying to make it permanent.
We're going to get into next step. What would be the presumptive next step if it's killed? Or stopped permanently? What's the next method?
Well, that depends on the government. If this judge issues a permanent injunction, which I hope she does, that means the law cannot be applied anywhere in the United States of America. The next step depends on the government. They may try to appeal it. So the next step would be right in this courthouse, which is the federal courthouse in Manhattan. They would go up to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. From there, it would go immediately to the Supreme Court if they wanted to take it that far. That's the question: is how far is President Obama or any president willing to go to destroy the civil liberties of Americans by allowing the government this ambiguous, amorphous power to detain people?
You made a comment upstairs off camera while our cameraman Patrick was getting the camera. You said something to the effect of, it's just ironic that a constitutional lawyer, he is the president. He came in on that wave of civil liberties and wanting to steer the country in a new direction that changed. And tell me about where you were going with that comment and just how the irony of it, because it seems like there is a real deduction, a real analysis of the Constitution, and I mean that's what was going on up there from my perspective as like third person, and I'll play devil's advocate all day and night. So it just seems that the Constitution is really being, is it being followed? Is it not being followed? Is it being used in some instances? Is it being abused in others?
No, the Judge Forrest in her ruling was very clear that this statute, in all likelihood, violates the First Amendment of the Constitution, free speech, and violates the Due Process Clause, which says you have a right to trial and you have a right to an attorney. And that's what she said in her opinion. She essentially said, in all likelihood, that the Constitution is being violated. That's why she preliminary enjoined. I hope she does permanently. The problem that most people have with politicians is they don't do what they say. And this is Exhibit A when it comes to Barack Obama. He's a constitutional law professor, former constitutional law professor. He knows better. He knows that this is unconstitutional. He knows that this should not be. Even in his signing statement, he was critical of it, but he's critical of it in the signing statement, but he signed the law anyway, and now he sent his Justice Department attorneys to go defend the law. So that's why people are turned off by established politicians, because what they say isn't remotely related to what they do.
But a quick question, shouldn't politicians be accountable? Let's say if they make a promise, like for their election, shouldn't they be accountable for their action?
And how do we hold them accountable?
They should be. Well, I mean, we're holding them accountable by bringing this litigation, and we already have got a federal judge to declare preliminarily that this is unconstitutional. We want it to be declared permanently unconstitutional, and that's part of how you hold politicians accountable. It's not just at the ballot box, because the ballot box has been relegated to a very limited form in the United States. You can have any kind of ice cream you want in the United States as long as it's vanilla or chocolate. Okay, as long as it's Democrat or Republican, that's what gets served up every year. So people are tired of that. Litigation is one option, but we need a whole bunch of new strategies to hold these politicians accountable.
Did you hear the government lawyer though, say that they were within the constitutionality with these the 1021B2 and the AU?
Well, that was like Alice in Wonderland, because the government was saying that we're within the Constitution because essentially the judiciary should allow all military decisions to be made by the president and the military.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what the Constitution says you can't do, because the judicial branch has the right to review it.
Now, so hypothetically speaking, Barack Obama is walking around this building right now.
Yeah.
You have two questions.
Yes.
What do you ask? On the record.
Two questions?
Yeah. Or up in the courthouse.
Yeah.
If
two
he was
questions
there
are,
today.
number one, Mr. President, why are you defending this law that you know is unconstitutional? And the second question is, how can you claim to believe in the rule of law if you're not even letting the court know whether you're detaining people under this law, which the court enjoins? And the government has now admitted today, their attorneys admitted today, that they don't keep track of why they detain people, or under what authority.
All right, cool.
Now let's talk to your son. What's your first name? Samuel.
Can I ask you one question? Because you were saying about the American people and... Oh, okay. Okay.
Done some research, and I was at the deposition, took notes on testimonies and stuff like that.
And how old are you?
I'm 19, I'll be 20 in a month or two.
Where do you go to school?
I go to Ohio State University, I'm going to be a junior.
Majoring in?
History.
Sorry to pepper you with questions. When there's a camera on, you got to get used to it. So what was your take? We saw you up there at the desk behind your dad. What was your impression of Judge, of the U.S. government's lawyers, and of your father and the team?
I mean, the vagueness of the law completely makes it so that it's almost impossible to tell what you can and can't do as a journalist. And I was present at the deposition when I heard Mr. Hedges testify, and from what he testified to, he's definitely singled out by the government in addition to the others, and there's no reason to think that they wouldn't be subject to detention based on the amount of surveillance and government attention that's been put on them. And it's ridiculous that an American citizen whose job is to talk to people from all over the world from different opinions, enemies, so to speak, can't do their job properly because of fear.
Yeah, that leads the word fear. That's very good. We didn't talk about that yet at all in the last few minutes, but do you talk to your friends, like your college buddies, and whatever, if you have a girlfriend or whatever? Do you talk to them and tell them about this case? And are they scared when you relay the information to them? Do they not believe you? Like, what is their reaction?
I've talked to many people about this, and actually one of my friends at school is a student from Egypt, and his family members, cousins, have been surveilled upon by the New York Police Department, and I spoke with him about contacting these people about the case, and he was very interested in it. He organizes all these rallies and protests at our school out in Columbus, and a lot of people in my generation and my age feel that free speech is one of the most important rights that you have, and any aspect of personal privacy is important to young people, just at least my generation, people my age, and I think that most of them would agree with me that, you know, it's irresponsible of the government to pass legislation that won't specify their regulations on.
And you brought up the New York Police Department and the spying on Muslims. That was found reported to be through the Associated Press and other media to be more than New York, obviously New Jersey.
Yeah.
You know, students at NYU, Rutgers. It's kind of all over the Northeast. So what kind of message does that send young people? You know, and one of the guys, I think one of the police officers was sent on like a kayaking or some sort of like wilderness trip to kind of surveil Muslims because of their ethnicity. What, I don't know what background ethnicity you are, and really it doesn't really matter. But what does that tell you? Like, is that the country that like when you were in third grade that you were told about?
I mean, definitely not. And I didn't even go as far as say like throughout my whole education, in any history class you take about the United States history, you know that you have certain rights that you've always been told that are existent constantly, and that the government cannot abridge your rights. And legislation like this is the first step to completely taking some of these freedoms away from you. Without those rights, what make our country different from, like they said, the government doesn't even have a record of what bills people are being imprisoned under. So without a record, how can you even fight that? It reminds you of, I'm not going to go as far as to say like a totalitarian regime, but it's reminiscent first stages of that.
You've heard, the term tiptoe totalitarianism, and Chris Hedges has used the term in a lot of his books and writings. Neo-feudalism, like basically a two-tiered society where the surveillance state is dominant. Yeah. And now, if you said that to most people, they might put a tinfoil hat on you and say you're a little bit kooky. But today, from your point of view and from the facts that were presented, and the fact that this judge, who actually Barack Obama, I did some background. That was an appointment through President Obama, appointed that potentially this could be one of those early steps. So what's your hope? After coming, leaving there today, and you said you're hopeful and you had a good feeling. But what's your hope coming?
Well, I mean,
out
first off, we don't even know who's going to be president in 6 months. So regardless of what they say, the Obama administration isn't going to do, we have no idea how that's going to change. Current events completely, like in the newspaper yesterday, Syrians, took 50 Iranians hostage because they were, militants working covertly in their country. Anything can change in a day's notice, but you can't just, the majority of these people probably don't know that this is going on, and they stand by without it going, like, any opposition. There's no fix to the problem.
So what's the resolve? What do we do?
I mean, this is obviously a good step in that direction, but, public awareness, first off, is completely important. The more speech that people hear about these issues, the harder it is for government to silence people talking if that's their intent. But I think that obviously tolerance of all ethnicities, all religions, Muslims, whoever's being persecuted under these laws is obviously completely important, but definitely awareness, I would say.
So essentially you're going to run for governor, of whatever state, and then get into the White House and for president?
Let's not go that far, but definitely things need to be done, and people need to do them instead of talk about doing them.
I'm on board for after 2020.
Sorry to push that. We don't know.
You guys talk to Zach?
Zach,
we didn't.
What do you say to those Americans, who are willing to, if the TSA wants to search me and go through all the searches, because there's terrorists, so we have to be inconvenienced because there's terrorists. What do you say to those people?
That's the answer all totalitarian governments have. That if we don't do these things, we won't be safe. I think that Franklin said it originally.
Right.
I don't remember the exact quote, but he basically said, we're not going to give up liberty just for security. There's no such thing as security if you don't have liberty.
Right. Because
then really, instead of terrorists committing atrocities, you just have police committing atrocities. You have to have basic respect for rights. And there's no reason to be afraid. Terrorism does not attack us normally, and We're quite secure here.
I mean, I heard, like more people die from peanut allergies than terrorist attacks in this
Terrorism
country.
does scare people,
But that's the whole thing with this government is it's a scare tactic, and just like making the boogeyman as an excuse really to take people's rights away and to just like expand in their agenda more and more.
Well, the truth is there are a lot of people who make a lot of money from all these security measures. There are
Right.
a lot of professionals who have their careers invested in it, and there are people making money out of all this, and that's partly why it happens. It's like that in every society where this occurs.
It's like the American people are just another commodity.
Right, and these
Is the
security
sense-
firms make their money by searching people, spying on them, setting up programs, and there's a lot of money being made by people, and that's why these civil rights are being violated.
And so here you are, without the American people don't even know that you are here fighting in this courtroom for them and their rights and liberties that they don't, like they would even gladly give up, and you're kind of, fighting for them, to not, and say no, it's just completely pushing it.
That's the way it always is in these cases. A few people do this sort of thing. People know about it though. People talk about it. But I'm very tired. I can't